Tonight, we are going to explore a very slow and boring history. This story is designed to help you relax, unwind, and gently fall asleep. So find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and let's begin. God regretted creating humanity. All of it. Everything had to drown, except one family. The book of Genesis, chapters 6 through 9, tells the story that would shape Western civilization's understanding of catastrophic flooding for the next 3,000 years. And it begins not with water, but with grief. God looked at the earth and saw that human wickedness had become complete. Every thought, every intention, every action was bent toward violence and corruption. And God regretted. The text uses that specific word, regret. The Creator grieved over creation, felt pain at what humanity had become. The decision was made. Everything would be destroyed. All flesh would be wiped from the earth. The experiment would end, except for one man. Noah was righteous, the text says, blameless in his generation. God came to him with a warning and a command. Build an ark. Not a small boat, but a massive vessel. 300 cubits long, roughly 450 feet, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high, 3 decks. A single door in the side. A window at the top for light and air. Cover it inside and out with pitch to make it waterproof. The instructions were precise. Bring animals. 7 pairs of every clean animal. 1 pair of every unclean. Bring birds. 7 pairs of each kind. Load food for everyone, enough to last months. Gather your family, your wife, your 3 sons, their wives. When everything is aboard, seal the door and wait. Noah obeyed. For years, he built. His neighbors must have thought him mad. Why would anyone build a ship on dry land, far from any sea? But Noah continued working, following instructions that made no sense in a world that had never seen rain like what was coming. When the ark was finished, the animals came. The text describes them walking to the ark on their own, drawn by some instinct or divine guidance. Pairs entering, filling the vessel with life. Noah's family boarded last. The door was sealed, and they waited 7 days. Then the flood began. But this wasn't just rain. Genesis describes it with terrible poetry. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. Water came from above and below simultaneously. The earth itself was breaking, releasing waters that had been held back since creation. The sky was pouring out everything it contained. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain fell. The waters rose higher and higher. 15 cubits above the highest mountains, the text says. Everything drowned. Every person not on the ark. Every land animal. Every bird. The earth became an ocean with no shore, no land, no refuge anywhere. The ark floated on waters that covered the world. For 150 days, those waters prevailed, a specific number, carefully counted. Then they began to recede. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued falling. Noah waited. After 40 days, he opened the window and sent out a raven. It flew back and forth, finding no place to land. Then he sent a dove. It returned. He waited 7 days and sent the dove again. It came back with an olive leaf in its beak, proof that plants were growing again, that land existed. 7 more days. The dove flew out and didn't return. Noah removed the covering and looked out at a world washed clean, empty, waiting. God told him to disembark, to release the animals, to begin again. Noah built an altar on the mountain and offered sacrifices. God smelled the pleasing aroma and made a covenant. Never again would flood destroy all life. Never again would the earth be drowned. The rainbow would be the sign of this promise, appearing in the sky whenever rain fell, reminding both God and humanity of what had happened and what was promised. Scholars date the composition of Genesis to around the 6th or 5th century BCE, though it clearly incorporates much older oral traditions. The parallels with earlier Mesopotamian accounts are undeniable. The divine decision, the boat, the animals, the birds, the mountain, the sacrifice. But the framework is different. One God instead of many. Moral judgment instead of divine noise complaints. Covenant and promise instead of just survival. Regardless of religious belief, this narrative became foundational. For 3,000 years, Western culture understood catastrophic flooding through this story. The Noah story became dominant in the West, but Europe had other flood memories. Older, stranger, coming from peoples who never read Genesis. Zeus looked down at humanity and felt only disgust. The water would wash them away, all of them. The Greeks told their own flood story, independent of Hebrew tradition, preserved in texts from Ovid's Metamorphoses and earlier sources. And like Genesis, it began with divine judgment on human wickedness. The Bronze Age of humanity had grown corrupt. People were violent, impious, arrogant. They didn't honor the gods. They didn't respect sacred laws. King Lycaon of Arcadia was the final insult. He tried to trick Zeus by serving him human flesh disguised as animal meat, testing whether the god could tell the difference. Zeus saw through the deception instantly. His rage was absolute. If this is what humanity has become, Zeus declared, then humanity must be destroyed. He gathered the gods in council. They agreed. Flood would be the method. Zeus released the south wind to bring rain clouds. He commanded Poseidon to let the seas rise and rivers overflow. The waters came from every direction, rain from above, seas from below, rivers breaking their banks, springs bursting from the earth. The flood covered everything. Mountains disappeared beneath the rising waters. Cities drowned. Fields became ocean. People climbed trees, but the waters rose higher. They fled to hills, but the waters followed. Some tried to use boats, but the storms capsized them. One by one, all of humanity died, except for two people. Deucalion, son of Prometheus, had been warned by his father. Prometheus knew what was coming. He had the gift of foresight. He told Deucalion to build a wooden chest, essentially a boat, and stock it with provisions. When the flood came, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha sealed themselves inside. For 9 days and 9 nights, the chest floated on endless waters. Finally, it came to rest on Mount Parnassus, the highest peak in Greece, the only point still above the flood. The waters began to recede. Deucalion and Pyrrha emerged into an empty world. They were alone, the last humans. Everyone else had drowned, and they were old. Too old to have children. Too old to repopulate the earth through natural means. The human race had ended, unless the gods intervened. Deucalion and Pyrrha walked down the mountain to the temple of Themis, goddess of divine order. They prayed for guidance. An oracle spoke to them cryptically. Depart from the temple with veiled heads and loosened robes, and throw behind you the bones of your mother. The bones of their mother. It made no sense. It sounded like sacrilege. Deucalion and Pyrrha stood confused and troubled. But then Deucalion understood. Their mother wasn't a person. It was Earth herself. Gaia. The ground beneath their feet. And her bones were stones. They covered their heads, loosened their robes, and walked forward, throwing stones over their shoulders without looking back. The stones Deucalion threw became men. The stones Pyrrha threw became women. New humans, born from the earth itself, forming from rock and soil. Humanity was reborn. The world could be repopulated. Life would continue. Notice the structure. Divine judgment on wicked humanity. A single righteous couple warned and preserved. A vessel that saves them. Waters covering the mountains. Landing on a peak after the flood. Beginning humanity again from survivors. The same narrative pattern we've seen in Mesopotamia, India, China, and the Americas. And here's what matters. Greek scholars discussed whether this was history or metaphor. Aristotle wrote about periodic floods that destroyed civilizations. Plato, in his Timaeus, describes Egyptian priests telling Solon about catastrophes that repeatedly wipe out human populations, leaving only mountain dwellers to survive while coastal civilizations drown. The Greeks themselves believed their myths contained historical memories, distorted by time but rooted in real events. Greek civilization, foundational to Western philosophy and science, preserved flood memories completely independent of Jewish tradition. They never borrowed from Genesis. They developed their flood narrative separately. Yet the story matches. Different gods, different theology, different cultural context, but the same catastrophe remembered. Zeus looked down at humanity and destroyed them with water. Only two survived to tell what happened. And from them, we all descend. But Europe's flood memories extended beyond the Mediterranean. In the frozen north, Norse tradition preserved a different kind of drowning. Not of the past, but of the future. In the frozen north, they prophesied the end. The serpent would rise from the sea, the waters would cover the world, and everything would drown before being born again. Norse mythology contains not one but two flood narratives. The first happened at the beginning of time, in the primordial past. Ymir, the frost giant, was the first being. When the gods killed him to create the world, his blood poured out in such quantities that it flooded everything. All the giants drowned in Ymir's blood, except for Bergelmir and his wife, who survived in a luda, variously translated as boat, coffin, or wooden chest. They floated on the blood water until it receded, then became the ancestors of a new generation of giants. That's the past. But the Norse also spoke of flooding in the future. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, the end of everything. The prophecy was detailed and terrifying. The signs would be unmistakable. 3 winters without summer. War spreading across the world. Brothers killing brothers. All bonds breaking. Then the monsters would break free. Jörmungandr, the world serpent who encircles the earth in the ocean depths, would rise. His movement would cause the seas to surge onto the land. Waves would cover mountains. The ocean itself would invade, drowning the world, while Jörmungandr writhed in his death throes fighting Thor. Fire would join water. The fire giant Surtur would come from the south with his flaming sword, setting the world ablaze. Everything would burn and drown simultaneously. The same combination of fire and water that appears in so many flood myths, suggesting catastrophic events involving both elements. The gods would die. Odin, Thor, Freya, all would fall in battle against monsters and giants. The sun would be swallowed. The stars would disappear. The earth would sink beneath the waves. Everything would end, but not forever. The Norse believed in cyclical time. After Ragnarok, after the drowning, the earth would rise again from the sea, green and fertile. A new sun would shine. 2 humans who survived by hiding in a sacred grove would emerge to repopulate the world. Some gods would return from death. Life would begin again. Destruction and renewal. Flood and rebirth. The pattern repeating endlessly through cosmic cycles. The world had ended before. The world would end again. Water was both destroyer and cleanser, wiping away corruption so creation could start fresh. The Norse texts weren't written down until the 13th century, centuries after Christianization, but they preserve pre-Christian oral traditions from Scandinavia. And those traditions, developed in complete isolation from Mediterranean cultures contained flood memories, not imported, not borrowed, indigenous to the north. Move west to Celtic lands. Ireland and Wales preserved their own flood traditions. The Irish Lebor Gabala Iren describes multiple invasions of Ireland, with floods between them destroying previous inhabitants. Welsh tradition speaks of floods that drowned kingdoms, with only a few escaping to higher ground. From Scandinavia to Greece, from Ireland to the Mediterranean, European peoples who developed distinct cultures, different languages, separate religious systems, all maintained flood traditions. And these traditions predate Christianity's arrival in Europe. They're not borrowed from the Bible. They're indigenous memories, suggesting something deeper. Perhaps these memories were inherited from a common ancestral population, people who lived through catastrophic flooding, so traumatic that every culture they split into preserved the story. Perhaps these memories reach back to when sea levels rose and drowned the European coastlines, when Doggerland sank, when the Black Sea flooded, when the Mediterranean broke through at Gibraltar. We've now surveyed Mesopotamia, the Americas, Asia, the Pacific, and Europe. Every inhabited continent, hundreds of cultures, different languages, different gods, different worldviews, yet all remembering water that covered the world. This cannot be coincidence. The statistical probability is too small. This cannot be shared psychology. The details are too specific. So we have to ask, what does the earth itself remember? What do the rocks and ice and sediment tell us about what actually happened? The rocks don't lie. The ice doesn't forget. And they're both telling us the same thing. The water rose. Fast. We've spent hours tracing flood stories across continents, through cultures that never met, finding the same narrative preserved in different languages and different mythologies. But stories can be distorted. Memories can fail. Oral traditions, however carefully maintained, can shift over time. If we want to know what actually happened, we need to ask witnesses that can't forget, that can't embellish, that preserve the truth in ways no human memory can. We need to ask the earth itself. Sediment doesn't lie about its age. Ice cores don't invent their chemistry. Rock formations don't exaggerate erosion patterns. The physical world preserves history with perfect accuracy, layer by layer, year by year, recording everything that happened even when no one was there to witness it. Scientists read these records the way archaeologists read ancient texts. Sediment layers show what happened year by year, each thin band representing a season, a flood, a drought, a period of calm. Ice cores trap ancient atmosphere in tiny bubbles, preserving the exact composition of air from thousands of years ago, revealing temperature and climate conditions with precision that no human record could match. Erosion patterns tell us where water moved and how fast. Fossil deposits show what lived and when it died. And when scientists examine these records, looking specifically at the period around 12,000 years ago, they find something remarkable. The Earth remembers catastrophe. The boundary is called the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, marking the end of the last ice age, roughly 11,700 years ago. That date should sound familiar. It falls within the time frame that many flood myths describe. And the transition wasn't gentle. It wasn't gradual. The geological record shows rapid, dramatic, sometimes violent environmental change. During the Ice Age, vast glaciers covered much of the northern hemisphere. Ice sheets miles thick blanketed Canada, Scandinavia, parts of Asia. Sea levels were nearly 400 feet lower than today because so much water was locked up in ice. But when the Ice Age ended, all that ice had to go somewhere. It melted, and the water went into the oceans. But it didn't melt gradually over 10,000 years in a smooth curve. It melted in pulses. Sudden, catastrophic collapses of ice sheets, releasing massive amounts of water into the oceans in periods measured in decades, not millennia. Meltwater Pulse 1A occurred around 14,000 years ago. Sea levels rose between 10 and 25 meters. That's 30 to 80 feet in less than a century. Some estimates suggest it could have happened in as little as a few decades. For coastal populations, this wouldn't be gradual adjustment. This would be catastrophic flooding within a single human lifetime, possibly within a single generation. Then came Meltwater Pulse 1B, around 11,500 years ago. Another rapid rise. Another pulse of water flooding coastlines worldwide. Another generation watching the sea advance, swallowing territories that had been inhabited for thousands of years. Think about what this means. Archaeological evidence and modern demographics both suggest that roughly half of all human populations live on or near coasts. The resources are there. Fish, shellfish, sea mammals, seabirds, river mouths bringing nutrients from inland. Transportation is easier. Trade is possible. Coasts are where civilizations develop. If this pattern held in prehistory, and there's every reason to believe it did, then the most populated, likely the most advanced human settlements would have been on coastal plains. And when sea levels rose in pulses, when the water advanced 30, 50, 80 feet within decades, those coastal civilizations would have been destroyed. The flooding would have been catastrophic. Within a human lifetime, familiar territories would disappear. Settlements would drown. People would flee inland and upward, becoming refugees in lands already inhabited. Trade networks would collapse. Specialized knowledge would be lost as the people who held it drowned, or were forced to focus entirely on survival. And here's what makes this particularly striking. These geological events, these meltwater pulses, these rapid sea level rises, coincide eerily with traditional dating of the flood in many ancient chronologies. The numbers align. The time frame matches. When the myths say the world flooded, the geology says the water rose. But rising water alone doesn't explain the stories. They describe more than just flooding. They describe sudden, violent catastrophe, fire and water together, darkness covering the sky. So what could cause that? Something hit the earth 12,900 years ago. The sky burned. The ice melted. The world ended in fire and water simultaneously. The Younger Dryas period is one of the most puzzling events in recent geological history. Picture this. The Ice Age is ending. Temperatures are rising steadily. Ice sheets are melting. The climate is warming. Everything is moving in one direction, toward the warm, stable conditions we live in today. Then suddenly, around 12,900 years ago, it reverses. Temperatures plummet. Ice cores from Greenland show the drop happened in less than a decade, possibly as fast as 3 years. 15 degrees Celsius. That's 27 degrees Fahrenheit. In less than 10 years, the world returned to Ice Age conditions. The cold held for 1,200 years. Then, just as suddenly, it ended. Temperatures shot back up around 11,700 years ago, rising even faster than they'd fallen. The Ice Age ended for real this time. The Holocene, our current geological period, began. But what caused it? Why would warming suddenly reverse? Why would the Earth plunge back into Ice Age conditions for over 1,000 years, then abruptly warm again? For decades, scientists proposed various mechanisms: changes in ocean currents, variations in solar output, volcanic activity, but none fully explained the evidence. Then, starting in the 1980s, researchers began finding something strange in the geological record. A layer of sediment, dark and carbon-rich, appears at sites across North America and in parts of Europe, dating to exactly 12,900 years ago. Scientists call it the black mat, and it contains things that shouldn't be there. Platinum concentrations far higher than normal. Nanodiamonds. Microscopic diamonds that form under extreme heat and pressure. Magnetic spherules. Tiny balls of melted rock, indicating temperatures hot enough to vaporize stone. Carbon spherules from massive wildfires. Shocked quartz showing evidence of intense impact forces. These are the signatures of cosmic impact. Something from space struck the Earth. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that fragments of a comet hit North America around 12,900 years ago. Not a single impact, but multiple fragments. A shotgun blast from space hitting ice sheets, oceans, and land across the northern hemisphere. The evidence keeps accumulating. The black mat layer isn't limited to one site. It appears across thousands of miles, suggesting continent-scale catastrophe. Analysis of the nanodiamonds confirms they formed at temperatures and pressures consistent with impact events. The platinum anomaly matches patterns seen at other known impact boundaries in Earth's geological history. And here's what makes it particularly relevant. The timing coincides exactly with multiple catastrophic events, all happening simultaneously. First, massive wildfires. Charcoal and carbon deposits show that fires burned across enormous areas at the same time. Forests in North America, Europe, and possibly other continents, all igniting within the same period. The black mat is essentially a layer of ash and burned material covering vast territories. Second, the extinction of North American megafauna. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, dire wolves, short-faced bears. Over 35 genera of large mammals disappeared at the Younger Dryas boundary. Not gradually. Suddenly. Their bones appear in the archaeological record right up to that black mat layer, then stop. Third, the disappearance of the Clovis culture. The most widespread and sophisticated human culture in North America at the time simply vanishes from the record at 12,900 years ago. Their distinctive stone tools stop appearing. Their settlements are abandoned. Whatever happened didn't just kill the animals. It devastated human populations too. Fourth, and most importantly for our story, rapid climate change and sea level rise. If comet fragments struck the ice sheets covering Canada and Scandinavia, the impacts would have caused catastrophic melting. Billions of tons of ice would have liquefied in days or weeks, not centuries. That water had to go somewhere. It went into the oceans, rapidly, catastrophically, creating exactly the kind of sudden, devastating flooding that flood myths describe. The impact would also explain the fire and darkness that appear in so many flood narratives. Impacts would ignite widespread fires. Debris thrown into the atmosphere would darken the sky for months, possibly years. Survivors would have experienced exactly what the myths describe: the sky burning, darkness falling, water rising, everything destroyed simultaneously. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains controversial. Not all scientists accept it, but peer-reviewed publications continue documenting evidence. The debate is legitimate scientific discourse, not fringe speculation, and the time frame is crucial. 12,900 years ago falls within the range that oral traditions could preserve. Aboriginal Australians maintain accurate stories for over 10,000 years. Something catastrophic happened 12,800 years ago. The Earth remembers it in layers of sediment, in ice cores, in the sudden disappearance of species, in the charcoal of continental fires. And humans remembered it too, in stories passed down through hundreds of generations. But impact and rapid sea level rise still don't explain everything. The flood myths don't just describe water. They describe losing entire worlds, advanced societies drowned and forgotten. So we have to ask, what drowned? What was lost beneath the rising seas? Everything we know about ancient humans comes from what survived above water. But the most advanced civilizations would have been on the coast. And the coast is gone. All of it. 400 feet underwater. During the last glacial maximum, 20,000 years ago, the world looked completely different. Not just colder, but geographically transformed. Sea levels were 120 meters lower than today, nearly 400 feet. That's a 40-story building, measuring the difference between Ice Age coast and modern coast. What we call shallow waters today were dry land then. The continental shelves, those gently sloping underwater plains extending from modern coastlines, were above water, inhabitable, and certainly inhabited. Look at Doggerland. It connected Britain to continental Europe, a vast plain stretching across what's now the North Sea. Rivers flowed through it. Forests grew. Animals grazed. Archaeological evidence shows humans lived there, their tools, their settlements. Evidence of their lives occasionally dredged up by fishing boats or discovered through underwater surveys. But Doggerland drowned as sea levels rose, and now it's gone. A lost territory the size of England, or Sunderland in Southeast Asia. During the Ice Age, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines were connected as a single landmass the size of India. The South China Sea was land. The Java Sea was land. What are now thousands of separate islands were one continent. People lived there. They built settlements, developed cultures, created trade networks. When sea levels rose, Sunderland drowned. Only the mountains remain, poking above the water as scattered islands. The Persian Gulf was a fertile river valley, not a sea. The Mediterranean coastlines extended miles beyond where they are now. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia to North America. The Black Sea was smaller, and possibly much smaller. Some geologists propose it was a freshwater lake that catastrophically flooded when the Mediterranean broke through around 5600 BCE, though that date is much more recent than the events we're discussing. Millions of square kilometers of land, inhabited, utilized, certainly explored by humans, now underwater. And here's the crucial observation. Humans didn't live randomly distributed across landscapes. We concentrated on coasts and river mouths. Why? Because that's where the resources are. Coasts provide multiple food sources: ocean fish, shellfish, seabirds, sea mammals. Rivers bring nutrients from inland, creating fertile zones where terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems meet. Transportation is easier on water than through forests or across mountains. Trade becomes possible. Population density increases. Complexity develops. Specialization becomes viable when food security is high enough that not everyone needs to be gathering or hunting. Archaeological evidence confirms this pattern. Ancient shell middens, massive piles of discarded shells from thousands of years of shellfish consumption, mark coastal settlements. The oldest permanent settlements we've found are often near water. Modern demographics show the same pattern. Roughly half of all humans live within 100 kilometers of a coast. If this pattern held in prehistory, and there's every reason to believe it did, then the most populated settlements during the Ice Age would have been on coastal plains. Not on the mountains where we find evidence today, but on the shores, 400 feet below current sea level. When sea levels rose 120 meters over several thousand years, not gradually and smoothly, but episodically, in pulses, with sudden catastrophic rises during meltwater events, those coastal settlements would have been progressively flooded. The most advanced civilizations, the highest population centers, the places where specialized knowledge accumulated, would have been the first to drown. And they're simply gone now, buried under hundreds of feet of ocean water and thousands of years of sediment accumulation. Less than 5% of the ocean floor has been surveyed. Underwater archaeology at the depths we're discussing is prohibitively expensive and technologically challenging. We have barely looked. But occasionally, hints emerge. The Yonaguni Monument off Japan, underwater stone formations with right angles and apparent terracing that some researchers argue are artificial, though this remains controversial. Dwarka off the coast of India, sonar mapping showing walls and foundations beneath 100 feet of water. Submerged settlements in the Mediterranean, predating classical civilizations by thousands of years. These might be just the beginning, the most accessible hints of what lies deeper. Our picture of human prehistory is fundamentally biased. We find what survived above water: inland settlements, upland populations, mountain caves, highland sites. These were often smaller, less complex, less advanced than coastal civilizations would have been, but coastal evidence drowned. It's not conspiracy. It's not suppressed knowledge. It's simple geography. The most interesting archaeological sites from human prehistory are inaccessible, buried beneath oceans, beyond our current ability to explore systematically. So this is how flood myths could be real. This is what they could be remembering. Catastrophic sea level rise during the Younger Dryas and afterward, destroying coastal civilizations, forcing survivors inland and upward, drowning the territories where the most advanced populations lived. But why do they remember? How did the memory survive when the civilizations didn't?